This week's book review is When McKinsey Comes to Town by Walt Bogdanich and Michael Forsyth. Our reviewer, as usual, is Nevil Gibson. Welcome, Nevil.
Pleased to be here.
This book describes itself as the hidden influence of the world's most powerful consulting firm. Does it live up to the billing?
Well, it certainly makes a very good effort. I mean, this is really a book by the New York Times. These two authors were just one of a team of reporters, and every scandal that they uncover about McKinsey's has something to do with the New York Times in it. So, these stories cover from scandals in South Africa, Malaysia, China, everywhere around the world. So New York Times people are used to this kind of coverage, and it's certainly McKinsey's not the first time the media have had a go at McKinsey. There's a number of books on them, but this is the latest one and probably the most comprehensive one because it's got this huge backup by the New York Times. Every story, every claim, every quote's is all sourced, so there's no problems with that side of it.
Do people just love to hate on McKinsey or on consulting firms in general?
Yeah, this is the tall poppy syndrome, I guess, in a way. McKinsey was the oldest management consulting firm, if you use that modern term. It was actually started in 1926 by a professor at the University of Chicago. And the study of business and management really took off under Peter Drucker. He wrote a book in 1945 on the corporation. So it's it was a respectable thing then to give advice in the boardroom on efficiencies and manufacturing, that sort of thing. But really the management guru thing really didn't take off until much later than that. But certainly even up until and after World War II, McKinsey was the company you went to if you ran a large corporation in America.
So you start your book review with Tom Peters, who attracted big audiences here back in the 1990s. How does he fit into things?
Well, he's called a management guru, and they all based their work of gurus on Peter Drucker and other researchers. But the thing here is that McKinsey every year hired the brightest brains it could find in the American universities mainly, and that specifically meant either the business schools or the law school. And you're talking Harvard, Cornell, or Stanford, which is where Tom Peters came from. So you get these graduates in who've never done a work in business at all, but know all the theory and everything like that, and work for McKinsey's, do all the grunt work, if you like, while the partners, because it's run like a law firm, while the partners pull in the fees. But Tom Peters left after 10 years. He wrote this book called In Pursuit of Excellence, or he co-wrote it, and that was in 1982, and that book just took off and became, everybody had it, and so they could go out on their own and charge large fees just by talking to audiences and that sort of thing, rather than sitting behind a desk and doing lots of work, which is what McKinsey were doing. So it's interesting. But what happens is that very early on in this book, Tom Peters is quoted as saying, can I use these words? I'm pissed off, I'm shocked, I'm horrified. This is when the first stories from the New York Times started appearing in 2018.
What's some of the cases highlighted in the book?
Well, the big case that
you mentioned scandals. What scandals?
Well, the first one was probably the opioid one, Oxycontin, that sort of thing, because McKinsey was actually advising Purdue Pharma. And if anyone's seen Dope Sick on Netflix, you'll know all about the scandal. Johnson & Johnson were also involved. So that was one but the consulting firms were advising on how to do these sales. But McKinsey are very clever at keeping things confidential, even if not secret. They seldom actually get blamed or say they did anything illegal, but certainly the company, Purdue, for example, it cost them a lot of money. The other one was South Africa, where there were basically what was happening there was the ANC, the new political party that took over, said that if you wanted to invest in South Africa or do any business with the state-owned companies, you had to have a company that was basically fronted by black people, and of course bribery and corruption was just endemic there, and McKinsey were right in there advising both the government and these companies, and the Gupta family from India who are deep. I mean, this is a huge scandal, it's still going on, and out of that McKinsey grossed about $100 million US in fees, and they've had to pay back at least half of it as we speak, but the investigations into all that are still continuing. But they took a huge knock there. That was front page stuff in the New York Times for years.
So this culture they've got of sort of confidentiality and secrecy allows them to work both sides of a contract. I mean, how can that be? Surely there's a conflict.
This is the most surprising thing. If you know very little about McKinsey, other than it's got this huge reputation, it stands on values, it does a lot of research, and it's very accessible books they published and that sort of thing. They've got a very high reputation. But when you learn that they've got consultants in the Pentagon advising the American military on all sorts of things, and then in Beijing office is donkey deep with at least nearly half of the top Chinese companies and the military building islands in the China South Seas. They had a big...
They'd argue they've got Chinese walls, I'm sure.
That's right. And so they're advising both sides. And in the healthcare industry, in which the book goes into in some depths, you've got all the drug companies and the providers of medical equipment and even managers of hospitals on one side, so McKinsey's advising them, but they're also advising governments and public health departments and all that sort of thing. And many McKinsey alumni run both sides of these industries, because as the company brings in new recruits from the business schools, if you've been a McKinsey consultant like Tom Peters, you can land top jobs anywhere in the world.
So do you think the firm's reputation is going to be affected by this book?
Well, it certainly affected my view of them after you read this book, because it's a pretty one-sided book, and they say that McKinsey has basically done more damage in the world than good, which I don't think is a justifiable thing, and I certainly didn't investigate whether that could be the case. In my review, I've skipped over that, but there's certainly a lot of questions that could be asked. And but in many ways, I looked up, and McKinsey's still got an office here, a very small one, just one person. He's well known, big office in Sydney, and I think the boardrooms still like to have that advice from McKinsey, because you look around, you've got Boston Consulting Group and that sort of thing. It costs a lot of money, and there's a bit of prestige attached to it. But I'd certainly advise anybody who's looking into hiring a consulting firm to have a look at this book and ask a few questions.
All right. Well, thanks for your time, Nevil Gibson.
Thank you.